Before we get started, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment about which country you are from, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that touch your heart and open your eyes. Your support helps us continue telling these great stories. Now, let's listen. The Swiss Guard has long been a symbol of unwavering loyalty and discipline in the Vatican. As the official bodyguard to the Pope, the guards must adhere to the strictest protocols and maintain a stoic demeanor, especially during significant events like papal funerals. They are not just security personnel, they are living representations of the Church's values, steeped in centuries of tradition and symbolism. The Swiss Guard's role is so ingrained in Vatican history that even the smallest deviation from established protocol is considered a serious breach of both duty and respect. On the day of Pope Francis's funeral, the stakes were higher than ever. The eyes of the world were upon the Vatican, and the expectations for precision were immense. The ceremony required absolute stillness from the guards, who were positioned at various points around St. Peter's Square and the surrounding basilica. Commandant Schmid, the head of the Swiss Guard, issued a warning to the guards before the funeral began, emphasizing the extreme importance of remaining motionless and respecting the traditions that have been followed for centuries. Any deviation, no matter how small, would be seen not just as an error in the performance of duty but as a direct dishonor to the Pope himself. The level of discipline required to remain perfectly still for hours on end is difficult to imagine. The Swiss Guard members are known for their ability to stand motionless for extended periods. Their faces impassive, betraying no emotions. This stoic nature is a critical part of their role, as they are not merely there for protection but also to embody the steadfastness and tradition of the Catholic faith. Commandant Schmid's speech before the ceremony was a reminder of the heavy burden the guards carried that day. Their actions would be scrutinized not just by those present at the funeral but by billions of people watching from around the world. For Lance Corporal Lucas Bowman, a 14-year veteran of the Swiss Guard, the pressure was particularly intense. Known for his perfect record and stoic demeanor, Bowman was a model of discipline. His years of training had instilled in him a deep respect for the traditions of the Swiss Guard, and he understood the immense responsibility that came with serving at such a significant moment in history. However, as the funeral procession began, something unexpected happened. In an instant, Lucas would break protocol in a way no one could have predicted, and his actions would reverberate through the Vatican in ways he couldn't have imagined. The funeral of Pope Francis was a somber occasion. One that called for every aspect of the ceremony to be executed with flawless precision. From the moment the coffin emerged from St. Peter's Basilica, every movement was meticulously choreographed. The guards were stationed at precise locations, their ceremonial halberds held at the perfect angle, and their bodies standing perfectly still, as if they were part of the very architecture surrounding them. This level of discipline was not just a matter of tradition, it was a symbolic representation of the Church's strength and resilience. Lucas Bowman stood at his post, his eyes fixed forward, his breath measured beneath the weight of his armor. The funeral had begun, and he knew that his role was not just to provide security but to represent the unwavering nature of the Swiss Guard. The Guard's role on this day was to symbolize the Church's commitment to faith and to embody the faithfulness that the Pope had shown throughout his life. Their stillness was meant to convey a sense of endurance and devotion, a powerful visual representation of the strength of the Church and its followers. The funeral itself was a grand display of Catholic tradition. As the procession began, altar servers walked ahead, holding candles and incense, followed by priests, bishops, and cardinals, each wearing the appropriate colors of their office. The simplicity of Pope Francis's coffin stood in stark contrast to the ornate ceremonial garb of the clergy, reflecting his humble nature. The coffin, made of simple cypress wood, was devoid of gold ornamentation or extravagant carvings. In keeping with Pope Francis's request for a modest and humble burial, Lucas Bowman had served the Swiss Guard for 14 years without any infractions. His service had been spotless. He had been praised by his commanders for his discipline and dedication. And he had earned a reputation for being a model guard. It was said that if the Swiss Guard could clone a perfect soldier, it would be Bowman. He had perfected the art of remaining motionless for hours, his face a mask of discipline, his mind focused on the task at hand. He had been trained to handle the pressure of high-profile events like papal funerals, and he knew that his actions on this day would be scrutinized by millions. Nothing could go wrong, but as the coffin of Pope Francis emerged into the daylight, Lucas felt something shift inside him. It wasn't something that could be seen on the surface, but deep within, something began to stir. As he stood there, with his gaze fixed forward, a weight pressed against his chest, hidden beneath the layers of his uniform. This weight was more than just the physical burden of his armor, it was the emotional weight of the day, the weight of what was happening. In that moment, Lucas knew that something was about to change. To understand why Lucas Bowman's actions on the day of Pope Francis's funeral were so unexpected, it's important to look at his background and his character. Bowman wasn't just any Swiss guard, he was someone who had lived and breathed discipline and precision for much of his life. Born in Lucerne, Switzerland, Lucas was raised by a father who was a watchmaker. His father's meticulous attention to detail and passion for precision left a lasting impact on Lucas from an early age. The small gears and springs of his father's watches taught him that everything matters. His father's words, magnifying glass pressed to his eye as he worked, resonated deeply with him. The space between seconds is where craftsmanship lives. This philosophy, focused on precision and careful attention to every detail, followed Lucas throughout his life, shaping the way he approached everything, from school to his military service and eventually to his work as a Swiss guard, in the Swiss Guard. Lucas found a perfect outlet for his natural inclination toward precision and discipline. The guard's demanding nature suited him perfectly. While other recruits struggled with the rigorous standards, Lucas thrived. He absorbed the lessons of the Swiss Guard as easily as a plant turning toward sunlight. His service record was impeccable, a blank canvas free from any blemishes. He was a model guard, admired by his peers and superiors alike. Commandant Schmid, in particular, saw something special in Lucas. He was the kind of soldier any leader would want in their ranks. If it were possible to clone the perfect guard, Schmid would have chosen Lucas without hesitation, but despite his perfection on the outside, Lucas carried with him a deep personal burden. His relationship with his father, the watchmaker, had left him with a profound sense of responsibility and discipline. However, there was another side to Lucas, one that was hidden from everyone except those closest to him. Late at night, after long hours of standing guard or performing his duties, Lucas would kneel beside his bed and pray. He kept a small wooden clock, a gift from his father, next to his bed. The clock, which had been his father's first creation, was something Lucas treasured deeply. It was a symbol of his family's values and his own commitment to precision and duty. But it was also a reminder of something more personal, the loss of his brother when they were young, an event that had deeply affected him. This loss was something Lucas had never spoken about to anyone. It was a wound that he kept buried, but it shaped the way he saw the world and the way he approached his duty in the Swiss Guard. It was this deeply personal history that would come to the forefront in the most unexpected way during the funeral of Pope Francis. Despite his years of training and his perfect service record, something inside Lucas shifted that day, something that would lead him to break protocol in a way that would forever change the course of his life and his service in the Swiss Guard. As the funeral ceremony of Pope Francis began to unfold, Commandant Schmid, the leader of the Swiss Guard, delivered a speech to the assembled guards that would echo through the entire event. Schmid's tone was stern, his words heavy with the weight of centuries-old tradition. He reminded the guards of their crucial role in the ceremony and underscored that their actions would be scrutinized not just by those present at the Vatican, but by millions of people around the world. The Swiss Guard's role was not simply to maintain security, they were living symbols of the Vatican's resilience, discipline, and unwavering faith. Schmid's words carried an unmistakable gravity. Any deviation from protocol could risk undermining everything the Swiss Guard represented. The traditions they followed were older than most of the modern world, stretching back over 5 centuries. The eyes of the world were upon them, and the importance of their role in this moment could not be overstated. Schmid's warning was clear: any deviation will dishonor not only the pontiff, but the faith itself. The expectation for absolute precision was more than just a formality, it was an essential part of the Swiss Guard's identity. Schmid's speech highlighted the ceremonial nature of their duties. For the Swiss Guard, the day was not only about executing physical tasks but embodying the deep faith and history of the Catholic Church. The Guard's stillness was a reflection of the strength and resilience of the institution they served. Their ability to remain motionless, disciplined, and reverent was seen as a powerful symbol of the Church's unshakable commitment to tradition. Lucas Bowman, as one of the most seasoned members of the Swiss Guard, had always excelled in this discipline. He understood the importance of every action, the significance of even the smallest movement. His training had made him a model of precision and stoicism, and his commander knew he could rely on him to maintain perfect stillness throughout the ceremony. But what Schmid could not anticipate was that the weight of the occasion and the powerful memories that Lucas carried within him would lead to an unprecedented moment of defiance. Schmid had made it clear, there was no room for personal emotion or any break in formality. The success of the ceremony, in his eyes, depended on the unyielding adherence to protocol. The Swiss Guard was meant to be seen but not heard, to embody an unspoken strength that resonated through their movements and stillness. In this moment, the discipline required was absolute. Yet, as the ceremony unfolded, the tension within Lucas grew, and something inside him began to shift. The turning point for Lucas came several years earlier, during a seemingly inconsequential moment that would have a lasting impact on his understanding of duty. It was a day like any other when Lucas was stationed near the colonnade during a public audience at the Vatican. The crowd was dense, and the atmosphere was filled with the hum of excited conversation. Suddenly, a high-pitched cry cut through the air, the frantic wail of a child separated from their parents in the crowd. According to protocol, Lucas was supposed to remain at his post, maintain visual surveillance, and radio for assistance. His role was to observe and ensure the safety of the crowd, but his instinct was different. Without thinking about protocol, Lucas moved through the crowd, stepping away from his post, to lift the child above the heads of the masses until a relieved mother pushed her way through to retrieve her child. The breach was minor, but it had still violated the strict regulations he had sworn to uphold. 2 days later, Lucas received a message that would change his life. A Vatican aide came to the Swiss Guard barracks and requested Lucas's presence in the Pope's private study. When Lucas arrived, Pope Francis was sitting in a simple chair, bathed in the soft light of noon. The Pope greeted him not as a commander to a soldier but as one man to another. He invited Lucas to sit, and the conversation that followed was unlike any other Lucas had experienced in his service. Pope Francis asked Lucas why he had broken protocol. The footage from the security cameras showed him stepping away from his position, but the Pope wasn't interested in reprimanding him. Instead, he wanted to understand the reason behind Lucas's action. Lucas explained that the child reminded him of his own brother, who had been separated from him at a festival when they were young. The memories of that day, and the fear he felt when he couldn't reach his brother in time, had triggered an emotional response. Pope Francis listened intently, then gently reminded Lucas that while many people come to the Vatican in distress, there was something uniquely different about this child that had drawn Lucas to act. The Pope's words were a lesson in compassion and the balance between duty and human connection. Sometimes, Lucas, the Pope said, the holiest thing we can do is move when we're told to stand still. In that moment, Pope Francis challenged the rigid division between duty to the institution and compassion for those in need. He explained that separating the two was an artificial construct. God didn't recognize it. The Pope's words stayed with Lucas, shaping his understanding of his duty as a Swiss Guard. It was not just about obedience to protocol, it was also about serving with love and compassion for others. This conversation would remain in Lucas's heart, and it would be this lesson that would guide his actions on the day of Pope Francis's funeral, as Lucas prepared for the funeral of Pope Francis. A new and unexpected chapter in his journey as a Swiss Guard unfolded. 2 nights before the funeral, as Lucas was returning to the barracks after evening patrol, an elderly priest named Father Ventresca approached him. Father Ventresca, who had been Pope Francis's personal secretary for many years, was carrying a cream-colored envelope sealed with the papal mark. The letter was addressed specifically to Lucas. The priest explained that Pope Francis had written several letters in his final weeks, some to family and close friends, but this one was meant for Lucas. It had no formal address or insignia, only a line of shaky handwriting on the back, for the man who once stood guard in tears. Father Ventresca had always been a quiet presence in the Vatican, a man who observed more than he spoke. But in this moment, he shared with Lucas that the Pope had known that Lucas would understand the timing of the letter. Some men stand guard because it's their duty, others because it's their nature, Ventresca said. He knew which kind you were. Lucas, deeply moved, accepted the letter, which he knew would hold significance far beyond its words. The Pope's gesture was one of personal recognition, a reminder that Lucas's devotion had always transcended mere duty. It was an acknowledgement that he was not just a guard but a man who cared deeply about the people he served, a man whose loyalty went beyond the institution. The letter would remain with Lucas throughout the funeral, and it would be in his uniform as he stood at the Vatican, just moments before breaking protocol. This letter would not just be a symbol of Pope Francis's gratitude, but a final personal connection between the two. It was a message that spoke of understanding, compassion, and the balance between following tradition and embracing humanity. And it was this letter, tucked into Lucas's breast pocket, that would ultimately inspire him to break the sacred protocol and honor the Pope in a way that no one could have anticipated. As the funeral procession moved forward, with the world watching from every corner, something extraordinary happened. The Swiss Guard, and particularly Lucas Bowman, had been trained for years to remain immovable, to embody the unwavering presence of the Church. But in that sacred moment, Lucas, holding the letter from Pope Francis in his uniform, broke his flawless discipline, a breach that no one could have predicted. The procession, filled with sacred rituals and precise movements, reached a pivotal moment. The coffin of Pope Francis, simple and humble as he had requested, was being carried out in front of the mourners. Behind it, the solemnity of the papal household followed, including priests, bishops, and cardinals. The weight of the moment was palpable, and Lucas, standing motionless at his post, felt it deeply in his chest. Beneath his uniform, the letter from Pope Francis weighed heavily against him, a reminder of the deep, personal connection he shared with the Pope. For years, Lucas had faithfully adhered to the rigid protocol of the Swiss Guard, a model of discipline and stoic composure. But as the coffin slowly descended the steps, the atmosphere became charged with something more than tradition. Lucas felt a profound sense of reverence and connection to the moment, a moment that transcended duty and demanded something more. In a single, deliberate motion, Lucas began to move. His first step was measured, not hesitant, but precise. The sound of his boot heel striking the cobblestones echoed through the square. His right hand reached slowly for the letter in his breast pocket, the papal seal visible to those closest to him. As the crowd watched in stunned silence, Lucas bent down and, with great reverence, knelt before the coffin of Pope Francis. He held the letter, now visible to those around him, and placed it gently on the ground. The gesture was a blend of military precision and profound reverence. For 28 seconds, Lucas broke formation. He had never done anything like this before in his 14 years of service. The world had always known him for his unshakable composure, his commitment to the rigid discipline of the Swiss Guard. Yet in this moment, the rules, the tradition, and the protocol all seemed to blur. He wasn't just a guard. He was a man who had been deeply affected by Pope Francis's leadership, compassion, and the personal connection they had shared. The audience, although caught off guard, recognized the gravity of what was happening. Despite the breach of protocol, no one moved to intervene. A young priest crossed himself, though it was unclear whether the action was one of shock or approval. Some cardinals exchanged glances, perhaps wondering how to respond to this unprecedented act. In the diplomatic section, the German chancellor leaned forward, whispering to an aide. As the moment reverberated through the crowd, the stillness that followed the brief breach was profound. No one interfered with Lucas's act, and no one took immediate action to correct him. It was as if the collective heart of the Vatican recognized, on some unspoken level, the sacredness of the moment, a moment where rigid tradition was momentarily bent in favor of something far more human, far more sacred. For those present, this brief but significant action would become a symbol of the deep reverence and love that Lucas felt for Pope Francis. It was a moment that would resonate far beyond the walls of the Vatican, one that would be remembered as a rare and deeply meaningful deviation from the cold formality of ceremonial protocol. The moment Lucas knelt before the coffin, holding the letter from Pope Francis, sent ripples throughout the Vatican, reverberating through the ranks of the Swiss Guard and beyond. The breach of protocol was not just a small, personal act, it was a visible defiance of centuries-old tradition. In an institution as steeped in ritual as the Vatican, such an act was bound to have consequences. But the response was more complicated than simple punishment or reprimand. Funeral mass continued, as it had to. The world was watching, and there could be no interruption in the ceremony. Yet, beneath the surface, there was a quiet shift. The cardinal in charge of the ceremony, Cardinal Mancini, leaned toward his aide with a concerned expression. "That man will never wear the uniform again," he muttered. His words were not just a reaction to the breach but an acknowledgement of the potential ramifications for Lucas's career in the Swiss Guard. Such an act of rebellion, if widely known, could set a dangerous precedent, one that could erode the discipline and authority that the Swiss Guard had carefully cultivated over centuries. In the days following the funeral, the Vatican's response was measured and subtle. The symbolism of the breach was understood by those who had witnessed it firsthand, but it was also clear that Lucas's actions were an unprecedented challenge to the Swiss Guard's most sacred principles. The machinery of Vatican ceremony, honed over centuries, absorbed the breach like a river flowing around an unexpected stone. The funeral went on as planned, but the event left an indelible mark on those who had been part of it. Later, when Lucas was summoned to a private meeting with his superiors, the consequences of his actions were discussed. The meeting was held in a small, dimly lit room deep within the Vatican, far from the public eye. Cardinal Favreau, along with Commandant Schmid, confronted Lucas about his breach of protocol. "You broke your oath, Bowman," Schmid stated bluntly. The most fundamental principle of the Guard, centuries of tradition. Lucas, however, stood his ground. "With respect, sir," he replied calmly, "I believe I honored the deeper meaning of that oath." His response wasn't just a defense of his actions, it was an articulation of the conflict he had felt within himself, a conflict between the rigid demands of tradition and the personal, human responsibility he felt toward the Pope and the faithful. The discussion was one of competing truths. On one hand, the discipline of the Swiss Guard was essential, and tradition had to be maintained. But on the other hand, Pope Francis himself had often spoken about the need for mercy, flexibility, and compassion. Lucas's act, in his view, was not a violation of duty but a fulfillment of the deeper meaning of the oath he had sworn to uphold. Despite his defense, the Vatican could not ignore the symbolism of what had occurred. While Cardinal Favreau acknowledged that the circumstances surrounding the act, a letter from the Pope himself, were unique, it was clear that Lucas's future in high-profile ceremonial positions had been affected. The incident would not be forgotten, and the risk of it becoming a widely known precedent was too great. In the end, Lucas was not dismissed outright. However, his role in the Swiss Guard would no longer be the same. He was removed from ceremonial duties. Not as punishment but as a strategic decision to limit the potential fallout. Lucas understood the unspoken message. He would not be publicly disciplined, but his actions had created too many questions, too much speculation. He would serve in less visible roles from that point on, far from the public eye. The consequences, however, were not just professional. They were deeply personal for Lucas. The Pope's letter, which had once been a symbol of his devotion and the profound personal connection between the two, had now become a catalyst for a deeper understanding of his own duty. It was no longer just about following protocol, it was about serving with heart, understanding that sometimes, even in the midst of duty, compassion had to take precedence. Following the funeral and the unprecedented act of breaking protocol, Lucas Bowman's future within the Swiss Guard was uncertain. The response from the Vatican, particularly from his superiors, was swift, though not as harsh as one might have expected. The breach of tradition was undeniable, but the reverence and respect behind Lucas's actions were also clear to those who understood the deeper context. Lucas was summoned to a private meeting with his superiors in a small, secluded room deep within the Vatican. The room was far removed from the grand ceremonies and the public eye, a space where the hierarchy of the Church could address delicate matters away from the gaze of the world. Here, the consequences of Lucas's actions would be discussed, not in terms of punishment, but in terms of maintaining the integrity and tradition of the Swiss Guard. the meeting was tense. Cardinal Favreau, the Vatican's senior official present, opened the conversation by addressing Lucas's breach of protocol directly. "You broke your oath, Bowman," Cardinal Favreau said sternly, his voice heavy with the weight of centuries of tradition. The Swiss Guard's role was clear, and any deviation from their prescribed duties threatened to undermine the respect and authority they had earned over the centuries. Commandant Schmid, who had always admired Lucas's discipline, looked on with concern. He had always trusted Lucas to be the perfect example of the Swiss Guard's discipline and precision. The act of breaking formation and kneeling before the Pope's coffin had shattered that image. The rules were the foundation of the Swiss Guard's strength, and a single breach could have far-reaching consequences. However, Lucas responded with remarkable composure. "With all due respect, sir," he began calmly, looking both of his superiors in the eye. "I believe I honored the deeper meaning of that oath." His words reflected the internal conflict he had experienced during the ceremony, a conflict between the rigid demands of tradition and the more profound, human impulse to show reverence for the Pope's legacy. Lucas's defense was not just an apology, it was a statement of his beliefs about duty and compassion. He argued that the very essence of the Swiss Guard's role was not to simply follow rules blindly, but to embody the values of loyalty, faith, and compassion. And in that moment, he had felt that a simple adherence to protocol would not have been enough to express the deep respect he felt for Pope Francis, despite his well-articulated reasoning. The response from his superiors was a mix of concern and reluctant agreement. Cardinal Favreau acknowledged that the circumstances surrounding the breach were unique. The letter from Pope Francis himself, a personal and deeply meaningful gesture, was a factor that could not be ignored. But there was still a larger concern about the precedent it set. The Swiss Guard could not afford to let emotions, no matter how sincere, dictate the terms of their duty. After a prolonged discussion, it was clear that Lucas's actions would not be met with an outright dismissal. Instead, the decision was made to remove him from any high-profile ceremonial duties. His service would continue, but his position in the public eye would be significantly diminished. The reasoning behind this decision was clear: the world had witnessed his breach, and too many questions would follow if he were allowed to continue in a visible, prestigious role. The Vatican did not want to set a precedent that could lead others to question when it was appropriate to deviate from protocol. Lucas understood the implications of this decision. He would no longer serve in the public-facing role he had held for 14 years. His service would continue, but it would be behind the scenes, away from the cameras and the crowds. There was no punishment in the traditional sense, no formal reprimand, but the consequences of his actions were undeniable. He had broken a sacred tradition, and in doing so, he had altered the course of his career within the Swiss Guard. Despite the subtlety of the Vatican's response, it was clear that Lucas had been marked by the event. He was no longer the pristine symbol of discipline that he had once been. His act of compassion had humanized him in a way that could not be undone. His reputation had been altered, and though it was not a formal punishment, he would carry the weight of his actions with him for the rest of his life. As the weeks passed, Lucas Bowman continued his service within the Swiss Guard, but things had changed. He was no longer stationed in prominent, ceremonial positions. His new assignments, though still crucial to the operations of the Guard, kept him out of the public eye. He worked quietly in the archives, far from the spotlight, carrying out his duties without the recognition he had once enjoyed. Despite the reduced visibility, Lucas found himself reflecting deeply on his actions and the lessons that had emerged from the moment he broke protocol during Pope Francis's funeral. The events of that day, the letter, the breach, and the aftermath, had reshaped his understanding of duty, discipline, and loyalty. The time spent away from the public eye allowed Lucas to reflect on the Pope's teachings and the conversations they had shared. He thought back to the private audience with Pope Francis, where the Pope had spoken to him about the dangers of separating duty from compassion. God doesn't recognize that division, Pope Francis had said. Sometimes the holiest thing we can do is move when we're told to stand still. Those words echoed in Lucas's mind, and he began to understand that true discipline was not just about following orders, but about understanding when those orders might need to be tempered with mercy, compassion, and human understanding. One day, while working in the Vatican's archives, Lucas had a chance encounter with Monsignor Dessa, an older priest who was studying a document with unusual intensity. The Monsignor, without looking up, mentioned that the saints valued truth over tradition when they had to choose. He quoted an ancient letter from St. Augustine to St. Jerome, where Augustine admitted his mistake in interpreting a passage and expressed that he would rather be corrected than praised incorrectly. Lucas was struck by this revelation. In the archives, amid the centuries of documents and secrets, he began to see his role within the Swiss Guard in a new light. His actions during the funeral were not just a personal rebellion, they were a testament to his understanding of duty in a deeper, more human sense. Lucas had been trained to see the Swiss Guard as an institution to be served with unwavering obedience. Yet, through the Pope's teachings and his own actions, he realized that sometimes duty required more than rigid obedience. It required the ability to discern when compassion must take precedence. That afternoon, as he walked through the Vatican's gardens, Lucas found himself reflecting on the encounter with the young boy who had recognized him as the guard who moved. The boy had asked, "Were you scared when you decided to move?" Lucas had answered truthfully, "No," but in that moment, he understood that the true courage was not in following protocol without question, but in recognizing when tradition should give way to something more profound. As Lucas continued his work in the archives, he was no longer just the perfect Swiss Guard soldier. He had become something more, a man who understood the balance between duty and compassion. He had learned, perhaps too late, that the greatest respect sometimes comes not from rigid obedience, but from brave acts of love. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit like and share it. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring videos. Thanks again and see you in the next one.